next panel discussion, sustainability. This word is one of the most frequently heard buzzwords when talking about our future development, regardless of whether we are talking about the future of our society, businesses, nature, or the planet itself. Our next session analyzes the roles that VC funds play in sustainable investing, how it works, what the loopholes are, and what action has already been taken on the ground. Please welcome our panelists, Mr. Nishith Desai, founder, Nishith Desai Associates, and a member to our advisory board. Mr. Steve Jennings, Chief Experience Officer, SysMeta, who would be joining us virtually from Antwerp. Mr. Paul Clements-Hunt, Chief Executive Officer, the Blended Capital House, who would be joining us virtually from UK. And Mr. Arvind Bansal, CEO, Continuum Energy. He would also be joining us virtually from Mumbai. Thank you all our panelists for taking out time from your busy schedules. The panel will be moderated by Smita Mishra, founder, Fandoro Technologies. Smita?
Am I audible? Yeah, great. Good evening, everyone. If last night, midnight, 12, the planet Earth came into existence, this night at 11:58 seconds would be when actually humans emerged, which means, technically speaking, in the last 1 minute of the existence of planet Earth. And in that last 1 minute, we have created enough development to take us and the planet where we are. The pace of development has been such that it has not been able to keep pace with the kind of resource replenishment that is required, and that has thrown the planet off balance, which can clearly be seen in the levels of floods, the levels of forest fires, the levels of a lot of these natural disasters that are coming up, which are causing huge economic losses, which is the reason, one of the key reasons why sustainability has become main boardroom discussions, and that is why we are bringing the discussion here to talk with all our panelists about it. So welcome the panelists, welcome Paul, Steve, Arvind, Kaushik, and Nishith Desai, sir. Thank you so much for joining us here. And let me start this conversation with Paul, because Paul Clements happens to be the person who has coined the term ESG. He was also the part of the team who originally devised the principles for United Nations principles of responsible investments for the investors. So Paul, could you actually help us understand the core philosophy of sustainability in your words?
Thank you, and good evening, India. Delighted to be part of IvyCap Day. Let me jump in. I know our time's limited, and I should make one correction. I'm actually here representing the UK law firm Mishcon de Reya, where I'm helping them develop a global sustainability practice. Look, I go back to my time as a UN official, and what we tried to do in the early noughties, we had a range of things. We had corporate responsibility, we had SRI, socially responsible investing, ethical investing. That's fine, but in terms of addressing some of the problems you've described, we have to move trillions, not billions, in terms of identifying new sustainability markets. So what we did in the UN, that was our start point. We used ESG, environmental, social, and governance, as part of a strategy to entice the world's largest asset owners into the conversation. So CalPERS, British Telecom Pension System, the Sovereign Wealth Funds, the Government Employees Pension Fund of South Africa, the deepest and largest pools of capital. We reached out as the UN and we said, in terms of the threats and the challenges to the planet, and in terms of the new opportunities from sustainability markets, whether in climate change, whether in biodiversity, nature-based solutions, the deepest pools of capital have to play a role. That's where we started. ESG was absolutely rooted in capitalism. There's a lot of background noise about it being woke. I'm about as woke as General Patton, right? So we used ESG and we said, what's capitalism about? It's about material risk. And ESG is to enable investors and businesses to broaden their radar screen. And the simple question is this a material risk to you? Do you understand it? Whether it's environmental or social or governance. And if it is a material risk, how does that relate to you roles as a fiduciary or as a board director, your responsibilities. Surely you should be looking at those risks, taking them into account and prioritizing them. Public policy shifts, regulation gets harder, and let me stop here because I know time is limited. 16 years after the launch of the Principles for Responsible Investment, which I had the privilege to do with the late Kofi Annan on the opening the UN markets, sorry, the US markets on the New York Stock Exchange. On that day, we had 53 pension funds, sovereign wealth funds with $1 trillion. Today, there are over 4,500 institutional investors with more than $100 trillion aligned with the UN principles. Does that mean all the problems are solved? No. What it means is a great big signal to the market that these issues are real. We as asset owners want to ensure they're considered as risks, but also once you understand the risk, you understand the new markets. Thank you for the opportunity to just frame that. It was one of the great privileges of my life to work with Kofi Annan and to deliver the principles for responsible investment, building on ESG and fiduciary law work we did, which was very important. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul, for the detailed response. That really helps. I'll move on to you, Arvind, particularly because your business, in my mind, is pretty much in the theme, aligns with the theme of this session, which is leveraging sustainability beyond regulatory frameworks. And I see your model to be one of them. Do you feel it's a unique model, or do you see that's a trend that's there right now?
Hi, Smita. Good evening, and good evening to everybody on the panel and the audience. Thanks for inviting me. Smita, I think, for times immemorial, corporates and businesses have been doing good. The frame of references have been different. As you rightly pointed out in your introduction, that the challenge that the world is facing is inadequacy of resources or inadequate replenishment rate. So this has led to a renewed focus on redefining what is good in forms of, as Paul rightly said, ESG. So I think this trend is, as Paul rightly mentioned, it has taken over $100+ trillion of assets and commitment to this philosophy. So this is not going to stop. This is only going to accelerate, and it is more and more important for businesses to embrace each of the three aspects of ES and G. Some businesses like ours in renewable energy lend themselves naturally to the E part of it, but there is equal imperative on us to handle the S and G parts of it, which don't naturally lend themselves to any business, but have to be consciously done as a matter of choice by the board and by the company.
Absolutely. So is that, what are the ESG factors that you like to consider for your business?
Okay, so from the environmental side, the critical aspect is CO2 emission avoidance, which happens by its very nature. But what I particularly like about our business more than the CO2 emissions is the water saving, because as a country, we are water stressed, and we replace the water, we save the water that would have been otherwise consumed in generating thermal energy. So wind energy projects use no water during their operations, and solar projects need a little bit for solar cleaning, but there are ways to have a net zero consumption of water even in solar project. So I particularly like the water saving part of our business from the E perspective. On the social side, our projects naturally come up in hinterlands where the infrastructure is very scant. So for every 100 megawatt of wind project, for instance, we end up building almost 60 to 70 kilometers of road network. That road network gives phenomenal access to economic activities to the population living in these areas, which were so far prevented from even public transport services. We've seen the hinterlands change dramatically within a year or two of the wind project starting operations, that those road networks see then public transport services coming to those villages going out, and youth going out to the cities and connected with the economic activities there. These are the two most important aspects on the E and S part. And I think the governance part, at Continuum, we've defined governance as, if you keep the jargon aside, we believe the governance is best achieved if we follow three principles. A, we disseminate a large amount of information. B, we disseminate it very frequently. And C, we disseminate to a large number of people. If you do these three things, every part of the governance framework, which means you have to be transparent, you have to be fair in your business, you need to insulate your business against corrupt practices. these three methods, in my opinion, are the simplest way to achieve governance requirements of a business, whether it is for the board of directors or for the investors or for our employees to believe that they're being treated fairly and equitably.
Absolutely. Thanks, Arvind. Thanks for sharing that. Moving on to Kaushik. Yours is a food delivery business, and food, particularly in the industry that you are, it's not very popular for being sustainable per se. But when I looked at your work, I could see a lot of sustainability initiatives all around. So could you probably share some highlights on those as to why, and also why you are doing it?
So at Biryani By Kilo, which is a cloud kitchen, as you rightly said, sustainability is not a priority thing. But I think since we cook our biryanis in earthen pots, so I think that comes naturally. So we do all our biryanis in earthen pots. We don't use any, we have no single-use plastic in the kitchen, or either paper or earthen pots. What we have done since we started using an 80 to 85% of our sales is biryani, which is cooked in earthen pots. So we've adopted potters from rural villages who have been doing pottery on the pottery wheel for ages, around 20 of them, have trained them, got expertise in-house to train them and improve their capability by mechanizing and increasing efficiency, using, instead of kilns where they burn wood to bake the handis, shift to natural gas, piped natural gas in ovens to bake the handis, make it in a faster through molding process. So added a lot of technology to the potters so that efficiency increases and they also grow. So we have around 20 of them. That is one thing we are doing at the back end. So second thing, we also consume a lot of oil because of cooking happens, and we recycle all these oils in the kitchen for biodiesel, and we have tied up with agencies that pick up the oil and convert them to biodiesel. This is the second thing that we do. Other initiatives is, I think we are a hardcore manpower-driven industry. We need a lot of manpower, and people have to feel safe, and they're working in an organization like us. We have riders, and during COVID or in rains on Diwali, Dashera, they are working very hard. So for us, it's very important to keep them safe so that they are able to work happily in our organization. So we take a lot of initiatives for them. Besides what the government regulates in terms of ESI and all, we have insurances for all of them. In case there's medical insurance, accidental insurance. So we take care of our employees so they feel safe and they work in an organization like us, and they're the front line for us, and we are in business because of them. So that is a few of them, and there are smaller ones that I don't think I will bring it up now. But
sure. So just to go forward on this discussion, Kaushik, you don't fall under the regulatory framework requirement to be doing any of this, but you're still doing it. Now, while there are, these are all good to do things, but are you really seeing some tangible benefits of these initiatives to your business?
yes, we are. First, as I said, that we are a manpower intensive industry with very blue collared employees being 90% of our workforce. So it is important to have a culture where people, because we followed a simple philosophy, because I come up the ranks. I started my career as a waiter 30 years back. So now I know how it feels not to be recognized for the hard work that you do, not to be respected. And that doesn't happen most of the time in an organization. So we've inverted the pyramid. Our frontline employees are the most important people in the organization, and I'm the least important person in the organization. That is the way we believe, that is why. And we take care of all employees as they are CEOs of the company, and they are treated very well. We take care of the families. We call their families for dinners. We meet them for dinners in our restaurants. So that is the way we've got involved in this whole exercise, because we know our business is successful today because of these frontline employees. And I was repeating myself, during COVID, when everybody was sitting at home, we took chances. Our employees were working and delivering food, because food delivery was the only thing that was open at that point of time, and they were delivering food. So to give them more confidence, we built up isolation centers in each region, had oxygen concentrators. I said, if anybody falls ill, we will take care of them. And we ourselves stood on the floor along with them to make sure that people get the food delivered to their home during peak of COVID also. So I think that is how we build the organization, respecting every individual. And if they stay on long, our attrition is the lowest in the industry, just because of that.
Wow. That's a pretty tangible benefit if you've really been able to push down the attrition because of this. Great. Thanks, Kaushik. Coming to you, Nishith, sir. We are already hearing why entrepreneurs should be picking up on sustainability. But why do you think investors should also look at sustainability, maybe beyond regulatory framework?
Before I start, let me tell you, if you can switch off this air condition, really we'll be complying with better ESG. It's so cold here, we don't need it, and we still have it more than what we need. Last night, I read news from Switzerland that if you use more energy than a prescribed threshold, there is not a penalty, but imprisonment of 3 years. This is, okay. So often, you know, this situation is there. I'm feeling very cold, unfortunately. But what I'm trying to say is that today, environment, social, and governance, all three have become integral part of, forget about law, forget about, you know, other things. For our very existence and sustainability, ESG is needed. The problem is that when you start incentivizing, okay, it in an objective manner, objective criteria can always be manipulated. And therefore, if you see, and Paul is here, in Financial Times, there are 2 interesting articles last week. One, ESG is existentially flawed, okay? And ESG labeling that lacks nuance provides only limited insight. So these standards can be manipulated. There is no particular global standard for ESG measurement. Of course, we are still evolving. So in some ways it is good, but some ways there is going to be a lot of greenwashing. And my advice for all startups, start with a heart. Start with sincere desire to comply with ESG. If you allow only the growth and financial growth in the beginning, that is where investors are sometimes driving. Sometimes the startups want to become unicorns and dragons, okay, in a short possible time. Then what Coinbase CEO said, right? Yeah. He said, we grew too fast, too big. And that's what is causing problem. What we need today is there are too many growth mentors. They tell you how to grow business, how to grow business. But very few culture mentors, very few mentors who mentor on the real ESG. Okay, this is one part I would say, irrespective. Second, you will get very good investment, not only very good investment, but also your valuations will improve. It's a new value creator. If you look at one of the companies like Renew, which we just helped them do a SPAC transaction. In India, the value could have been very different. Global markets are giving a very different valuation. Okay, so when you build global companies or global, you know, businesses, ESG is very important, but just bear in mind that you are doing it for the sake of good, not just for the greed. I will stop here for a minute. I'll be happy to go on and on because, you know, I got an opportunity, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Nishith sir. Maybe I'll stretch the same question to you, Steve. Since you are in the business of helping businesses adopt sustainability too, why should businesses be looking at it beyond the regulatory framework?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm going to go back to the opening remarks that Paul made actually. And ESG is rooted in capitalism. And I think one of the narrative issues that we have is that capitalism, for many, many reasons, gets a bad rep. But without capitalism and the huge changes we've seen since the dawn of the industrial age, much of what is now possible wouldn't be possible. You need to be able to generate vast amounts of wealth from business. The big opportunity really becomes more of a mindset opportunity than anything. We have to shift the mindsets of investors, whether they're VCs, family offices, sovereign wealth funds, high net worth individuals, and shift the mindset of global leaders, both political, because without the political will, it's like pushing a huge rock up the side of a mountain. It's hugely challenging. And business leaders, the mindset needs to shift in terms of continuing to grow businesses, to grow economies. GDP isn't the only measure of success. We have this word that we use, or these three words that we use, called return on investment. And I think return on investment is an important metric. It's how companies are measured, it's how many things are measured. The however is, I think we can flip the last word when it comes to investment and also start to measure return on impact. And that impact needs to be modeled and mapped against ESG and all three pillars of ESG. There isn't one that's more important than the other, although I do agree that governance, without the governance, the other two are built on a house of cards. You need to really get the governance piece in place. And even for a startup, you need to have people around you that are going to hold you accountable to decisions that you're making. If you're developing a physical product as a startup, there is no excuse whatsoever to not do some pretty basic research to find out what the supply chain is of some of the components. And I'm speaking to companies that are growing exponentially, and they're pioneering things like lab-grown meat, and they have not looked at their supply chain from day one. So they're storing up a whole bunch of problems for later down the road. And believe me, you don't get a free pass because you're in an on-trend industry, whether that's renewable energy, lab-grown meat, electrification of vehicles. It doesn't give you a pass to do a whole bunch of things that are contributing to the problem in the hope that sometime down the road, it'll even itself out. It is such a toxic narrative to start telling ourselves. And I also believe that VCs, and that's the broad investor community, they need to have within their practice, they need to have the experts and the tools to provide the expertise and to provide the frameworks to companies that they're investing in. They can do very simple models, they can do simple due diligence that can either make them say, we're going to invest, or this company doesn't meet the criteria, but we can provide them with a series of tools that will get them investor ready. These things are not difficult to do. It really comes to mind shift. And we need to really feel comfortable about building companies in these new, triple P, net zero economies that are going to drive immense wealth. There's nothing wrong with companies becoming incredibly valuable. The next triple trillion-dollar business is going to come out of what we're talking about. The team may not have even come together. The spark of ingenuity that becomes the catalyst for that business may not have yet reached the consciousness of anybody. But the next really big growth businesses that are going to be like the Apples and the Googles are going to come out of this space that we're in. And that's where the big opportunity is for investors, for governments, for entrepreneurs, for the talent that's got the ingenuity. But we need to be clear on narrative and not allow narrative to get pulled into places where it's not meant to be. And that includes ESG. It's getting pulled into places today where it's losing the essence of its value and need. And that's a shame.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. So you want to say something, sir? Yeah.
No, I think I'm also looking at from two other perspectives. One, from venture capitalist perspective, and second, from the LP perspective. What we have seen lately is that reputed financial institutions, high net worth individuals, and particularly, they are also becoming sensitive. So when they invest in a fund, they often set out that 50% of the investment must go into the business as sustainable, or the impact. And impact has, the report has to be given by a venture capitalist to the LP, that what kind of impact they have seen, so in measurable terms. So I think practically that is one trend that we have seen lately. And I believe that in future, in next 5-7 years, there's going to be a lot of litigation around this area. So, because greenwashing and other kind of things that happens. Now, what would happen, it's all stakeholders come together in litigation. I won't go into detail. But the possibilities is that if venture capitalists have financed a company, and it is found that it has aided and abetted the violation of, because now regulatory frameworks have come, then VCs may also become liable and they will be made party to the litigation. Okay. And of course, if they don't comply, there will be issues with the LPs as well. So I think in long term, it is important that you start working on this from the start, not just when company has achieved a particular size. Typically, the mindset was that let company grow a little bit, we'll take care of it. But I think time has come when to start with, you imbibe this value into the startups, you know.
Sure.
Sorry for my interruption.
No. Thank you, Nishith sir. So, coming back to you, Arvind, one of the sector or one of the kinds of startups that I work most often are the tech startups or the tech-enabled startups. And quite often they come back to me saying, we are not extractive in nature, we are not mining, we are not manufacturing, why should sustainability or ESG be important to us? And I remember having a long discussion with you on this particularly, and I would like to hear from you if you could share some of your thoughts on what are the ESG aspects or the sustainability aspects that tech and tech-enabled startups should look at.
Sure, Smita. So I think, if you look at it from the reverse side, governance is fundamental, whether it is a tech-enabled business or not. The governance practices, the culture of governance, the culture of being fair and transparent and equitable to your partners, to your employees, to have a culture of transparently dealing or disseminating information to your investors. That has to be embedded, as Nishith sir said quite clearly, from the beginning itself. That is an absolute hygiene factor now in the businesses, and there is no way around it. On the E&S aspects, I think tech founders have a very, very profound impact on the way societies are growing and changing shapes. It is paramount for the founders to think that the product or service that they're designing is meant for a positive impact. It shouldn't, for instance, from my own personal thoughts, and people may have different perspectives on it, but shouldn't create a service or product which is addictive or causes attention deficit disorders or things like that, which is there are quite a few of those products in the market. Tech-enabled businesses should be, the founders and entrepreneurs should be very mindful of what product or service they are rolling out in the market and what will be the first order and second order impacts of those products. The third thing, and some of your founders may not like it, is one of the best ways to have a sustainable company is to avoid, making a star out of anybody in the company. Where, there is an increasing tendency, especially in the tech world, of lionizing the CEOs. And that starts to create governance challenges. We've seen several of them in the recent past. It'll be very good to have a culture in the company where, as Kaushik said very well, that the most important people are the people on the front. So stop having a culture of lionizing the CEO beyond a point and have equal value for all your employees, all your stakeholders in the business.
Absolutely. Thanks, Arvind. Maybe then I'll come to you, Kaushik, as Arvind just mentioned that you are probably adopting the right kind of culture and business processes. What is the core of the business culture for you, particularly with respect to sustainability?
As Sir said that we started from day one when we had one outlet. Now we are opening a 100th outlet next week. So this has been a culture because, as I was discussing with you last night also, it has come in naturally to us that we have to be aware of what is around you, and you're not destroying what is around you. First of all, try and conserve as much as possible. And in our ways, small bits and pieces, as I said, of piped natural gas, we shifting from LPG to PNG gas in our cooking system, recycling oil, using earthen pots, not using things. And being nice to our employees is something that is a culture that we are trying to create, that people stick on longer and the company becomes much more successful. So I think that is something we had at one outlet, and when we 100 outlet holds following the same principles, and that seems to be working for us. And we like to go that way.
Absolutely, and congratulations on the 100th store.
Somebody switch off the air condition.
Yes.
I think I saw Ashank. Ashank was also shivering there,
I've just requested them, yeah. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Sorry for my interruption.
do you want to shift seats? This is not as cold. All right. Okay. Um, so I'll come to you, Paul, then just to continue the discussion here. Quite a few of our founders and the businesses that we work with have this confusion on reporting frameworks and standards, and because there are so many of them, while we do not wish to talk in detail about regulatory framework or the reporting aspect right now, but there is this constant query that we always get is there are so many of them, and clearly we do, whether it is GRI, SASB, TCFD, CDP, for various aspects you have various different reporting frameworks, you have various ratings, indexing agencies, but there is no, what the businesses are really looking for is, okay, Smita, if you help us out with the ESG or the SDG or the sustainability aspects, who is the authority who is going to validate that you've done the right work? Who is going to put the seal and stamp saying that, yeah, this is what sustainability meant and this is what you have done? And maybe if you could throw some light on how should we look at this problem and what should be the solution for it?
Smita, look, for your companies, simplify, simplify, simplify. We are in the Wild West stage of, it's mad acronization of sustainability. There's massive overcomplication, right? So if you have a business that wants to step into the reporting and disclosure piece, and that's where, you know, regulation and policy in whatever market you're in is going, my direct recommendation would be very simple. Follow what's happening in the International Sustainability Standards Board, where they're trying to bring the standards together. But more importantly, as a firm, say, I understand my risks and I understand my new markets. What are the prioritized ESG risks that I want to focus on, and what is the standard I'm going to run with? Because if you get involved in this sort of, I call it the alphabet soup phase of sustainability, and there's massive confusion across the markets. Let's simplify it. The SDGs, the UN's SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are where we want to get to as a global community. ESG is one of the tools to help you get there. Pick your tools, pick your goal, build them into your offering, own your narrative, make sure that your board, from a governance standpoint, backs that operationalization of what you want to do, own the narrative, and go boldly to the market. Cut through the complexity. And, you know, let me just maybe add on a concrete example there of one of the most interesting Indian businesses we've worked with, and will remain nameless, but they're looking at the intersection of AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, scientific breakthrough, and sustainability goals. It's how do you bring sanitation? How do you bring education? How do you bring better health, right? And I think, I guess one of the challenges in the context of, I think the Indian VC community and the Indian business community is maybe leaving the issue where corporate social responsibility has been a traditional go-to, I think, in India, going back a few years, but leaving that in some ways behind and moving on to the fact that this is about core, fundamental business development and opportunities, management of risks, new markets, and that's how you're going to attract investors. I'll leave it at that, Smita, but I could keep going for hours, but you know, I've set myself a discipline in the
Sorry, we lost your voice.
The story, the better. For your companies, simplify, 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 project your strong narrative, know your risks, and know how it creates new business opportunities.
Thank you, Paul. That makes a lot of sense. So effectively, that's a message maybe we do want to send across the founders. There's no particular seal stamp that you are one should be looking at. Most of sustainability is voluntarily done, and it should be looked upon as benchmarking yourself and progressing on your own risks and opportunities. Coming to you on this aspect, Steve, is while at one end we have founders looking for such validations, there are other businesses which are actually adopting sustainability, and we do see some kinds of efforts. In fact, we see a lot of those efforts in the PR and newspapers and news channels and marketing ads about their story on sustainability. What do you think about greenwashing there? How much is too much, or how much is like too little and not enough?
Yeah, it's another great question. And I think we're almost architects of we're our own worst enemy at times. People that work in enterprise, running global brands. It's so easy to create content and convince consumers that what you're doing is the right thing. But I've become very cynical. You know, I've been inside of some very big companies, like big global brands, right into, you know, the nerve center. And, you know, you're working with people, you're having workshops and meetings with people that are incentivized to hit numbers, to deliver on plan. They're, you know, accountable to their KPIs and everything else. And, you know, to show them that they need to do something a little bit different can sometimes be quite unsettling. I don't think there is doing too much. I don't think you can do too much in this space. You can't over deliver. But I think also going back to a point that Paul has just made, you can get lost in the complexity of not even knowing where to start. There is so much complexity. There are so many different frameworks, acronyms, buzzwords. You could create an amazing buzzword bingo framework out of this. There are just so many of them, and it's very difficult, even inside of large companies, let alone for fledgling companies to start the journey, to even know where to start. You have to distill it down to the simplest things. You can't get lost in the big global narratives of what's happening, you know, around food security, water security, all of the issues with climate change, because it's utterly overwhelming. And, you know, we're reading more and more stories about people that are leading the charge inside of large companies around ESG or sustainability, suffering from sustainability fatigue, ESG fatigue. It's not because they don't want to do what they're doing. They're simply overwhelmed. Yeah. They don't have the framework. They haven't got sign off on a narrative that makes it easy for them or easier for them to do what it is that's needed to be done to start the process. And it is like the Wild West. We're at the beginning of this journey. We're still taking baby steps. What we have to do is hold ourselves accountable to lay down the infrastructure that's needed for others to come along and scale on top of that infrastructure. And that infrastructure is underpinned with the 3 elements of ESG, the foundational pillars of the SDGs. These are layers of infrastructure. They're not silver bullets, but these layers of infrastructure need to be embedded into every aspect of what we're doing, whether it's at a government level, at an economic level, at a, you know, companies that are out there working at the grassroots, at a foundation level. The infrastructure is the key. Otherwise, we're building amazing technology today, both hardware and software, but it's being built on a house of cards. Most companies have got no idea what their externalities are. It's really complex stuff, but you have to start somewhere. You have to start and accept that as a CEO of a company or a leadership team or teams that are responsible, you're potentially laying down a framework for the succession leadership team to come in and pick it up and benefit from the scale.
Yeah.
And I think we have to think like this. We're talking about, you know, Marshall Plan scale here. This is generational. And if we try to achieve quick wins, we need quick wins because we've got ourselves into a bit of a mess. But there are no quick wins. There are little wins that help us on our way, that give us a sense of progress. But this is a long play. It's been a long time getting
Absolutely,
here, and it's
yeah.
going to be a long time getting us out of it.
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you for adding details to that. I'll probably ask the concluding question to you, Nishith. So, that while you've already mentioned when to start and start early and start from the day one, but as we heard from Paul, we heard from Steve, we heard from Arvind and Kaushik, clearly there is no, it's still in a flux. The space is in flux. So what is it that one could start with as a startup, particularly the tech and tech-enabled businesses? How should they take their baby steps towards sustainability?
See, it is like this, because the standards are developed, definitional context are still missing. Different labeling companies are using different standards. So most important thing is put hand on your heart and see, are you really doing ESG, number one. And take your own judgment. Second thing is regulations are there, but I think regulations are still imperfect. Third thing is that, and that is where we are in litigation already happening, is in greenwashing, and what is meant by that is when you spend more money on marketing your ESG achievements than what you have really done. Yeah. It is already late. Coca-Cola and others are already embroiled in litigation. Not that they are doing right or wrong, I'm not at all on that. But I'm saying litigation risks are increasing on the ESG. And final thing I would recommend to all the medias, media companies and associations, do not introduce ESG awards.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nishith, sir. So while we do have regulatory requirements coming up, but the pace is slow, so I would certainly recommend all the founders, businesses, investors, do not wait for the regulatory frameworks to show up while they are showing up, and at a faster rate than ever before. Like everybody, all our panelists have mentioned, benchmark yourself, look into your own hearts, do the right business the right way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for such an insightful session.
Smita.
Governance should indeed be embedded since the beginning of any business, as discussed right now. Can we have a group photograph, please, along with our virtual attendees?